Bills Mafia. On tonight's Air Raid Hour, Dave and I will be going through all the major storylines in our preview of the 2024 Buffalo Bills training camp, which gets underway in just a couple of days. We are finally here, but first.
Welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour, brought to you on the Cover One Sports Network. Dave, excited to finally be back. We have live football action, albeit practice, this week.
Good little summer break for us, coming back in, our show being on the Monday, training camp practice officially getting underway starting Wednesday. This is really the final home stretch we've got until the Bills set out on their journey in 2024 to try to, to take home the Lombardi ultimately, and in a lot of ways prove to a lot of pundits and things like that with this sort of version that we're going to go through, and like we're going to talk about tonight, a new version of this Bills team on their quest to really bring home the hardware. So I'm excited. We're close. One plus week left of July, and then we're into August, and then the countdown is truly on. So definitely happy to be back. Had a nice little break from social media there for a couple of weeks, but this is exciting time right now. The start of training camp is always a fun time for us doing this show and for fans.
Yeah, starting next week and running through the preseason, we're actually going to be joined here every Monday night at 9 p.m. by Bills beat reporter Alex Brasky of the Batavia News Daily. So we're going to have boots on the ground, and we're going to have someone reporting to us live from Buffalo Bills training camp. I know there are going to be other members of Cover One that are going to be in attendance, and they'll talk about what they see on their own show, since obviously me and you aren't going to be on hand. We want to have some boots on the ground. So Alex has been kind enough to say he would join us throughout the remainder of the preseason. So that's what's going to sort of be what we do over the next couple of weeks. So that means our goal for today is to sort of figure out and preview what are we looking for and what are the things that we want to ask Alex about when we have him on the show over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and there's tons of storylines. We were talking offline, and you did a great job clipping together all these these best of air raid from sort of the early parts of the spring and into the summer. And it was no coincidence that most of the viewership we got on those videos was centered around what's going on the offensive side of the ball. And obviously that is not a surprise given the departure of Stephon Diggs, all the new faces in the wide receiver room, the expectations around Dalton Kincaid going into year two, and then obviously Josh Allen at the center of all of it. So a lot of storylines, notably on the offensive side, but there's storylines really on this entire roster, offense, defense, and special teams. So a lot to cover, a lot of good storylines, and some under the radar storylines as well that that I want to hit on as well tonight. So yeah, lot to get through.
One of the more under radar stories, in my opinion, and this is a user submitted question from Brian Freedom 2. You can find him on X. He says, what leaders organically emerged to fill the void left by all of that veteran experience that is now out the door? Stephon Diggs, Mitch Morse, Micah Hyde, Jordan Boyer, a lot of veteran players who have been here a very long time. They are out the door. So one of the things that I'm going to have my eye on this training camp, and one thing that I think this Bills Embedded series is kind of giving us an idea of as well, who are those leaders who are going to step up and sort of organically fill the void left by all that veteran leadership? Who are some names that you have your eye out for as guys that you think are going to step up as sort of the new era of leaders on this football team?
I kind of hinted on this, sometime one of our shows over the last couple months. And um, look, when Tremaine Edmonds left this team, he was not necessarily like the vocal leader, but he was an important piece of this defense, obviously. And, whatever your views on him, fine. He was never really that vocal guy as one of the leaders, and he didn't really need to be honest. But I do think his successor in Terrell Bernard, based on his play last year, based on what we've seen in some of the embedded videos. And by the way, I haven't seen the newest one. I was kind of saving it for when while I'm at work tomorrow, so I'm trying to not see any spoilers. I know it's going to be tough, but I do think Terrell Bernard is one of those guys, and I think you've seen that through some of the prior embedded videos, through some of the prior interviews he's done throughout the summer, and the mentality and the way he talks and the way that his coaches talk about him. He certainly seems like a guy to me that going into year 3, the season he had, probably feeling like he's got a little bit left on the table and missing that playoff game, we know, against the Chiefs with that injury, albeit had a really incredible season overall. I'm not obviously taking anything away from that, but that's eating at him a little bit. And so to me, I think Terrell Bernard is really going to step up. I think he's going to be kind of that leader in that duo, as AK Cash says here, between Bernard and Milano. Milano does it a little bit more emotionally on the field, I would say. I think Bernard overall in the locker room and things like that are going to be, I think Bernard is definitely going to be one of those guys. So he's probably the tops of my list. And I'll give you a chance to talk about guys that you think, but there's a couple other ones as well.
Yeah, Bernard is a really good pick. I don't want to spoil anything on Bill's Embedded for you, but there's a good, minute and a half, 2 minutes where they are walking you through a drill, and Terrell Bernard is leading and coaching his fellow linebackers, guys like Balin Spector, guys like Dorian Williams. He's leading the defense. He's calling the defense. He's challenging his teammates. So there's a good little portion there towards the end of Embedded where it's really showing how much more confident Terrell Bernard is in himself, in the system, and it's rubbing off because he is being a vocal leader on the field with some of his younger teammates. Another guy that I sort of feel like, based on things that I've seen this offseason, is going to step in and is going to fill a void. I think Connor McGovern is really going to step up, and I think he's going to fill a void. Obviously, he's the pivot. So now obviously he's the guy who has to call the protections at the line of scrimmage. He's going to be working hand in hand with Josh Allen, but just watching the way he communicates with his teammates, the rapport he has with Josh, the rapport he has with Dawson Knox, the reports of the pizza parties that he was having for his teammates last year, and how the Buffalo Bills winning streak started when Connor McGovern started bringing players over to his house for like homemade pizza in his pizza ovens that he has. So to me, Connor McGovern seems like a guy who's going to step up as well. And there's just a number of other guys you can choose from. Khalil Shakir, maybe more of a quiet leader, but he seems like a kind of guy who's going to lead by example. I think Rasul Douglas is one of the veterans left in the room. Teron Johnson is one of the veterans left in the room. And Sean McDermott has sung the praises of Taylor Rapp as well, saying that he's a guy who's taking command of the defense, taking command of the huddle. So I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Taylor Rapp might end up with a C on his jersey as maybe one of the more unexpected names.
Taylor Rapp, I think, has the complete trust of the coaching staff, and I think that goes a long way in that as well. Got a significant amount of playing time last year in his first year here. Obviously, the Bills made it a priority to bring him back early on in free agency, so that's not a surprise to me. I think Rapp is the type of veteran that would complement, Rapp and Douglas, as you mentioned, will be the types of veterans that can really complement the nucleus of the team, the younger players. And then like you said, you have guys like Taron Johnson who have been here as well. So the defensive side of the ball is certainly not lacking guys who can be, leaders of this team. I like the McGovern comment there, stepping out of the shadow a little bit, potentially, of Mitch Morse, playing that position now and moving over. And to me, talking about one of the under the radar storylines, and I made this comment on Twitter yesterday as I finally started getting back into the social media mix a little bit, was like, we need to talk about what this O-line's level of play is going to be like this year, and sort of the expectations on Connor McGovern as a leader on that offensive line. We know what Dawkins is. How is a guy like Edwards going to step in as a starter, presumably, right? How is a guy like McGovern going to take, SVGP under his wing as well? That's going to be important, right? Because a lot of people see SVGP as a, maybe a under the radar player who could earn playing time, and the playing time likely would come at center. And so it's going to be interesting for Connor McGovern to kind of like step into that role, knowing that that guy that he has to mentor, is a guy that's not necessarily in direct competition with him, but a guy that's going to potentially back him up. So really interesting story on the offensive line as well.
Got a new play caller in Joe Brady, or new-ish play caller in Joe Brady, as his first training camp as the full-time offensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills. It's going to be really interesting to look at the concepts and the formations that the Buffalo Bills are running in training camp. Obviously, they're not going to show too much to people. They want to keep some things a secret, but I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye out for, and this is one of the things that I'm going to want to talk to Alex about when he comes on the show. How much 12 personnel are they using? That one's a big one for me because, again, maybe another little minor spoiler from Bills Embedded. It really seems like the relationship between Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid is incredible for two players that are supposedly competing with each other, right? The relationship that those two have created in such a short amount of time, those guys are going to be working in unison. Those guys are going to be working in sync. There's not really an ego in that room. Plus, you got Josh Allen. So a way for everybody to eat Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid, is for the Buffalo Bills to utilize 12 personnel. So that's a big one for me, to see how much of that they're running, just the balance of how much run work do they do versus passing work, the red zone play selection. Those are all sort of these concepts, formations, offensive identity type of things that I'm going to keep my eye out for in training camp. What are some offensive identity Joe Brady things you're going to have your eye out for?
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to necessarily see this in training camp, but like the sequencing of plays, the distribution, you're not going to necessarily see that in training camp. But one of the things that's going to be interesting to see is if they get a little bit more creative with their formations, they get a little bit more, they get a little bit more creative in sort of spreading the wealth a bit. And I'm never going to say that the group as a whole is better without Stephon Diggs, but there may be less pressure on Joe Brady as a play caller to kind of force feed an individual guy. And we saw him as he took over the play calling duties last year. Stephon Diggs still got his targets, but like Joe Brady was not afraid to like go in other directions if other things were working. So to me, I think the chemistry and sort of the cohesion of this brand new group and how quickly the offense kind of gets their rhythm in training camp under Joe Brady with all the new faces, because that's a big job for him, right? Going into his first full-time sort of full season with this group, with really an entirely new set of skill position players, minus Knox, Kincaid, and Kaiir, right? And so I think it's going to be, where do we see, what types of routes do we see all this entire group doing during camp? And is it going to be, are we going to see guys doing different things than we've seen in past years, given that the collective unit of skill position players gives you pretty much everything you could ask for in the cupboard, right? So how is he going to deploy these guys out in the field? Who's he going to have running deep routes? Who's he going to have working underneath? Is he going to use guys like Curtis Samuel in the backfield? That type of stuff is going to be interesting to see.
The quarterback position, obviously, everyone's going to have their eyes on Josh Allen. A lot of new faces on this offense. It's going to be really interesting to see how he interacts with all of his new teammates, especially those skill position players and some of the new offensive linemen in front of him. Well, not new, but new to the positions, the guys in front of him. It's going to be really interesting to me to see how long it takes things on offense to, finger quotes, click.
Yep.
Because we saw in minicamp, the defense was winning a lot and the offense was very sloppy, and the offense was sort of getting dragged off the field by Sean McDermott. They stayed an extra day and practiced an extra day when they typically don't do that, and they cancel the last day. The OTAs for the offense were not good. Now, we cautioned on this show, like, hey, they're laying a foundation. They're all getting used to one another. The defense is going to be ahead. It's going to take the offense some time. But I think what's going to be really interesting to see is how long does it take for the offense to catch up to the defense? Do they come out firing on all cylinders and have a huge day one? Does it take them a week? Does it take them 2 weeks? Like, how long does it take this new Buffalo Bills offense to click? That's going to be one of my focuses in this training camp as well.
Yeah, but you would because you think like the defensive line, outside of Leonard Floyd, your starters, you got pretty much back. With Von Miller kind of sliding back in and Epinesa back, Daquan Jones at
Mhm.
Oliver. The linebackers, with Milano coming back, like they're ready. The secondary is the big question of whether the defense can be sort of ahead of the offense, I think, early in the early going. So to me, that's a really interesting dynamic, is to see, can the offense with all the new faces also, how do they match up with this defense that kind of has, you know, some new faces too, right? The safety group's brand new, outside of
Mhm.
Taylor Rapp, and you have, Douglas and Benford, I guess, coming back with Elam in the mix. And it's like it's a different group than what the offense started out against last year in training camp as far as the
Mhm.
secondary is concerned. So yeah, I think my prediction is like day one will not go great for the offense, but by like day 2 or 3, it'll be
Mhm.
they'll have figured some things out. And it certainly looks like that from the couple of clips I did see with Joe Brady talking to the offense, that they have a really good pace already established. And I could be wrong here based on what else is in the video, but it seems like they have a really good pace established. And it seems like there's a lot of positivity around the communication. And I think that's going to help with a new group of guys, right?
Mhm.
Like fostering that positivity, I think will speed things up as well.
The running back position, that's where it gets really interesting to me. It's not just who gets the carries behind James Cook. It's not just, oh, who's on the second team? Is it Ty Johnson? Is it Ray Davis? I'm looking at specific situations. On third down, who is the running back on the field with the first
Yep.
team? In the red zone, who is the running back on the field with the first team? In third and long, obvious passing situations, who is the running back on the field with the first team? To me, the best way,
2-minute drill as well.
yeah,
Who's on the
2-minute
field?
drill. The best way for Ray Davis or Ty Johnson to eat into James Cook's carries is to be that third down pass protector or be able to contribute more maybe than James Cook in the red zone. So that's what I'm really going to be keeping my eye out for in the running back room as these guys behind James Cook try to establish themselves and try to eat away into James Cook's workload.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because, the Bills went in to last year, Damian Harris had the injury. I know that. Latavius Murray kind of stepped in as at number 2. Ty Johnson came along later. James Cook was the main guy last year. And I would say overall, right, you've swapped Ray Davis in for Latavius Murray, right? That's essentially all that's happened in this running back room if you really kind of boil it down to how it played out last year with the primary, ball carriers. I'm not counting guys like Leonard Fournette in this because he didn't really play much last year, but it was Cook, it was Murray, and it was Ty Johnson. Now it's Cook, Ray Davis, and Ty Johnson. So to me, the interesting thing will be is, does the utilization of James Cook kind of stay what it was last year? And does Ray Davis kind of do more of what Latavius Murray did? Or is it
Mhm.
more of situationally, the snap counts may end up being about the same, but you see Ray Davis maybe playing in different types of situations, like you mentioned, red zone and others, into where at the end of the season, it may be James Cook's volume was similar, but situationally, he came up the field maybe in different scenarios that he would have otherwise been on the field last year. So you're right. I think that's going to be interesting to me. Ray Davis is the guy to keep the eye on, right? Because he's the new face, and like where the Bills going to see and put him as a
Mhm.
rookie starting out this year. And to me, that's going to kind of be where we see everything else fall into place, is what they do with Ray Davis.
The other skill position players, wide receivers and tight ends, that's going to be something very interesting to keep our eyes on as well. Joe Brady mentioned his sort of mantra was everybody eats. Everybody eats. We want to spread the ball around, be more sort of like the Green Bay Packers were last year with all the various different weapons that they were able to sort of dump the ball off to. However, what I want to see in training camp, or what I'm going to be on the lookout for, I want to see if a clear alpha emerges, or maybe alpha is not the right word. Maybe a clear favorite of
Mhm.
Josh Allen emerges. Is there anyone that sort of runs away from sort of a chemistry aspect? Is there a guy that Josh Allen seems to be throwing to a ton on third down? Is there a guy that Josh Allen seems to be locking in on in the red zone? Whenever there needs to be a big play, who's the one making that big play? Is it the
Mhm.
same name every time, or is it a different name every day? Those are the type of things that I'm going to have my eye out for as training camp progresses over the next couple of weeks.
The obvious answer is it will be Dalton Kincaid, right? Because I think
Mhm.
there's clearly the chemistry was there last year, second on the team in targets behind Diggs, who just had a monster target share, right? Everyone is kind of expecting, and I predicted Dalton Kincaid be in that 110 to 120 target range this year, which is still 40 odd less than what Diggs was getting, but still could lead the team. I think that chemistry is already there with him and Kincaid. I think there will be chemistry between him and Knox and Shakir as well, given that they've been in the system and we saw what Shakir did down the
Mhm.
stretch last year. The one hesitation I have on Shakir is Joe Brady's also going to try to have to mix in these new faces like Curtis Samuel and Keon Coleman. So how much does that really impact Shakir being a quote favorite? I think that's why you see Kincaid sort of emerge as the favorite target. And I don't think that really would come as a
Mhm.
surprise to anyone.
We got AK Cash coming in saying, I bet Mac Hollins comes out and shocks everybody. One of my favorite things this offseason is coming to the realization after seeing not one video, not two video, not three video, not four video, but like 5 or 6 videos now. Apparently, Mac Hollins just doesn't wear shoes unless he's playing football. Like he is just barefoot all the time. And apparently, he's a very eccentric gentleman. He's an interesting character, and I'm looking forward to learning more about Mac Hollins sort of as the season progresses. But back to sort of AK Cash's point, another thing that I'm looking for in training camp is we got a lot more bigger bodies at our skill positions this year, whether it's the 12 personnel tight ends, Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, the receiver room with Mac Hollins, with you can even lump sort of MVS in there, with Chase Claypool, with Keon Coleman. There's a whole bunch more size and a different type of go up and get it wide receiver that just the Buffalo Bills have not had a lot of in years previous. That's going to be something interesting to see what fundamentally changes because of that new skill set in the room.
Yeah, and this is where Joe Brady's at has to be taken to task, right? As far as
Mhm.
like there's a lot of pressure on Keon Coleman, and I get that because of how much he's already endeared himself to the fan base without even taking a single snap. But ultimately, I think, and I said this last year as well, going into the season, there's more pressure on. At that time, I said Ken Dorsey. There's more pressure, I think, on Joe Brady than there is Keon Coleman, right? Because he's got to figure out the best way to use his skill sets as they exist today, right? At the beginning of or at the end of July. And as things change and as he evolves, as I'm talking about Coleman improves or whatever, maybe he struggles, right? Then Joe Brady's got to figure that out. And it's going to be a game of chess for him. And it's going to also be interesting to see how the dynamic between a guy like Coleman, who is a high draft pick, plays out versus a guy like Curtis Samuel, who was like the quote big money free agent signing, right? Who's also being raved about by Joe Brady. So I I think outside of Dalton Kincaid, it could be anybody's guess who the next guy might be in line. But um yeah, I feel like that it's just the skill set, and I mentioned this earlier, the skill set of the overall group, you've got everything covered. So
Mhm.
that's where I just keep coming back to is how do these guys get deployed? Um, and yeah, I know we're gonna talk about it more,
Yeah.
but to me, that's still the number one thing.
Yeah, Claude Puig comes in with a great comment. He says, one thing these Bills receivers are going to need to block. What he means here is run blocking. And that's for certain. I think the three guys who have the leg up in terms of blocking, Curtis Samuel has gotten a lot of praise from Joe Brady, his time in Carolina, the way he was able to run block. Keon Coleman That was one of the things that was a positive about him in the pre-draft process. The fact that he can go out and get it, use his big body, is a willing run blocker, and Mac Hollins. So
Yep.
if three receivers start to separate themselves and maybe get more snaps, it could be the three of those guys for this very reason right here. So it'll be really interesting to see how a guy like Khalil Shakir develops as a run blocker. If Marquez Valdez-Scantling, if it sort of motivates some of these other guys because they maybe see their snaps dwindling a little bit because other guys have this one trait that they lack. So that would be something interesting to keep an eye on. And you just mentioned, like, how are guys deployed? Curtis Samuel is the big one here, right? Like,
Yeah.
this to me seems like a guy that maybe he just comes in and he's just a guy, he's a wide receiver number 2, or he's a good third option in this offense. And he's just a fun little gadget playmaker, can do a little bit of inside stuff, a little bit of outside stuff, a little bit of running back stuff. He's just a nice, fun weapon. He could be that. But I also think that as we get into the first couple weeks of training camp, we could see a situation where it's like, whoa, this dude just never had a quarterback like Josh Allen. This guy could really be something. Like, this guy could really be one of the bona fide, like, statistically better wide receivers in the league this year, just because he's got the benefit of playing with Josh Allen. He's so versatile. And Joe Brady is a guy who's used him before and used him the best anyone's ever used him. So Curtis Samuel, like, I feel like a week or two into training camp, he could be the talk of the town.
Yeah, and I mean, look, they're not paying him. They're not giving him that $30+ million contract for him to just be a gadget guy, right? So I think that. Look,
I mean, like a souped up, like when Roy Collins says a souped up version of McKenzie, that's a good receiver. Like, think of the best things Isaiah McKenzie did, but imagine, like, think of the best games Isaiah McKenzie had as a Buffalo Bill and the best plays that he made, and then think about a guy who can consistently do that week in and week out. Like, that's pretty darn good. And I do think Curtis Samuel does a lot of things, like getting down the field as a deep threat, a heck of a lot better than a guy like Isaiah McKenzie. But when I say gadget, I mean like a souped up gadget type of player, not just like a 5 or 6 touches a game type of gadget player.
Well, like, you kind of start thinking about Curtis Samuel, and I start thinking about, like, what can he do? Like, what kind of plays does he run or that he could do that are similar to other guys in the league? And how does he do that, or how will he project against guys like that? So he can do some of the things Stephon Diggs did, right?
Mm-hmm.
He can play on the inside and the outside. He can run very crisp routes in that intermediate area of the field. Is he going to be as tough after the catch physically as Stephon Diggs? No. So that's a part where, like, you say, okay, like, he can do some of that, but he's not as good in that area. Can he line up in the backfield like a Deebo Samuel? Yes, but he's not as physical as a Deebo Samuel. So it's like, I'm not comparing him to those guys, but he's got elements of those skill sets, albeit at different levels compared to those guys. That makes him a very interesting option in this offense. And he could be a version of what the 49ers do with Deebo in the Bills offense. Not saying he is Deebo. I'm just saying, like, he can line up in the backfield. He can do other things. He's not as physical as Deebo, and he's not going to be as big of a, downfield threat as like a pure speedster, but he's going to be able to do a lot of things. And at the end of the day, it's about getting open. And I think Josh Allen in his career has been really good at getting the ball to guys that can separate well. And that was the big talking point about Keon Coleman, is like, that's not necessarily his game. Like, he brings something new that we haven't had. But I think Curtis Samuel is going to bring a level of comfort to Josh Allen, much like Dalton Kincaid will. So I do think Samuel and Kincaid will end up being very trusted guys, I'll say, by Josh Allen by the time training camp, is and Kincaid already is.
Yeah, just over the course of training camp, it's how much of a wide receiver committee is it going to be? Is it going to be Samuel, Shakir, and Coleman are your dudes, and you sprinkle in MVS and Mac Hollins? Does Mac Hollins maybe have a bigger role than we think? Does MVS have a bigger role than we think? What is Keon Coleman's role? Do they throw him right into the fire? Do they work him in maybe a little bit slowly, as Jessica Tennis said, like they did with Dalton Kincaid? All of those things we have to be on the lookout for. Things I want to talk to Alex about when we have Alex on here. I go back to Brandon Beane's conversation with Chris Long on his Greenlight podcast earlier in the offseason, right after the MVS signing. And, Chris Long was having this conversation with him. He was like, I feel like even though you guys lost Stephon Diggs and everyone's ragging on you, like, your receiver room got better because you got, like, deeper. You might have lost that one star, but you got deeper. And Brandon Beane agreed with him, talked about the importance of the tight end and the running back, but then he sort of labeled each of the Buffalo Bills wide receivers. He said Shakir and Samuel were the rack guys, the run after the catch guys. He called MVS the vertical threat. He called Keon Coleman the X, and he called Mac Hollins sort of the glue guy. So to me, Brandon Beane seems like he's sort of typecasted all of these guys or has their one niche already. Maybe the Bills do, but it'll be interesting to see how many of those guys can leave that comfort zone and do multiple things. And the more they can do, the more they can get on the field. And it'll be really interesting to see how this competition plays out over the course of 2, 3, 4 weeks during training camp.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think labeling those guys are kind of like, to me, that's the vision of Brandon Beane, right? And why he's kind of, as Parcells would say, like, bought the groceries, right? Like, and so he picks he signed and or drafted these guys with a vision in mind, obviously in conjunction with Sean McDermott's input, but like the vision in mind to build this complete receiver room, right? So now it's about translating that onto the field. And that gets back to Joe Brady, is that Joe Brady's vision as well? Is that a starting point, right? And then see where things go. It's probably a very reasonable starting point to say that if you're Brandon Beane, and like, why not, right? That makes total sense. So it'll be interesting to see if that is the starting point and it stays that way, or if things change a bit.
And Claude Puig comes in with a great comment. He says, in that interview and in other interviews and in some of the Buffalo Bills social media posts, they're sort of telling you which 5 guys are going to make the team for sure. And that's the 5 guys that we've just been talking about. So that leads us to what was supposed to be the second position battle we were talking about. The first was, and I missed it in my show notes, Ray Davis versus Ty Johnson. So the second sort of position battle I want to highlight here is the 6 wide receiver spot. And you have a ton of different skill sets competing for this final receiver spot. And maybe it turns into 7. Maybe the Buffalo Bills keep 7, but you have KJ Hamler, you have Andy Isabella, you have Chase Claypool, you have Tyrell Savers, you have Justin Shorter, you have Brian Thompson. There are others as well. Those are just sort of the main guys. And it's going to be really interesting to see who wins that 6th spot. Is it a guy like Thompson, Shorter, or Shavers because of their special teams ability? Is it a guy like Chase Claypool because of his upside? Guy like Hamler or Isabella, even though they're not return guys, are they returning a lot of punts and kicks this offseason in training camp to try to earn that 6th spot? Who knows? Gunning, return game, all these various different special teams things, as well as their play on offense, could determine who wins this 6th spot. But that's definitely one of the battles we're going to keep an eye out for. And it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, the battle will be interesting. And honestly, the decision making at other positions on the roster, let's say at linebacker, could also be a factor into which receiver ends up making the team. And you're like, may ask, well, what is that? What do you mean by that? It's because the Bills lost some special teamers, right? And they had kept 6 linebackers in the past. Maybe they only keep 5 and they keep a 6th wide receiver that is a special teamer, like a Tyrell Shavers, right? And to kind of fill that void on special teams. So other position groups could dictate the Bills, or influence, I should say, the Bills' decision maybe on who the 6th wide receiver is, if all things are equal, right? Now, if a guy is totally outplaying another one, then they're not going to just keep a lesser player, a guy who had a lesser camp just because of that. But if all things are equal and you have this battle between 4 or 5 guys, that may end up becoming an influence on the decision. Traditionally, this 6th player the Bills have kept has been a core special teamer at the wide receiver position. So I don't necessarily think they're going to go away from that. If they can get someone in that 6th spot that does give you a little bit of offensive upside, fine. But the Bills already have, and Joe Brady already has his hands full trying to figure out how to get the ball to Cook, Kincaid, Shakir, Knox, Coleman, the rookie, Samuel, right? Like, so like there's enough Hollins, MVS, like there's enough that last roster spot, you kind of have to think of it more from a special teams standpoint, in my opinion.
Now let's talk a little bit about the trenches, the offensive line, a number of directions we can sort of go as we look for training camp storylines. I want to start with Connor McGovern. I think one of the most important things for this offense, one of the things that I'm going to have my eyes on is how does Connor McGovern look at center? Does he look comfortable with Josh Allen? Are there any miscues? Or does the center position become a competition? And the guy that everyone, I think, wants to talk about in terms of being a part of that competition is Cedric Van Pran Granger. When training camp starts, this is one of the things I'm going to ask Alex. I'm not sure if he's allowed to answer this question or not, but I'm going to ask him, like, hey, when the second unit came on, who was the center? Because that's going to be really interesting. Is the second team center going to be SVPG or is it going to be Will Clapp? Like, SVPG might have to work his way up from third team center to try to push to get into a competition for the starting center role. Does he get to work in at guard to prove his versatility? Tracking the hype of Cedric Van Pran Granger and tracking the ability of Connor McGovern to play center, that's going to be front and center for me just as much as anything else on this offense.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, I would say maybe by training camp's end that SVGP would be the number 2 center. I am a little bit more reserved in my sort of hype for him as coming in and really competing to start at center. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think all of the chatter we've heard from Brandon Beane and from what Connor McGovern has said is like this has been kind of like the plan was he was going to be the heir apparent to succeed Mitch Morse. Contract wise, it's very reasonable what they're paying Connor McGovern, but it's a decent chunk of money for him. And so I think the hype around, and I'm not necessarily saying that Van Pran Granger won't get some reps at guard. I think based on Aaron Cromer's history, like we should probably fully expect that. But I don't think that's where he's going to settle in when all is said and done, and in the roster as like a backup guard. I think he is going to end up being the number 2 center, and I think Connor McGovern will be firmly entrenched as a starting center. I don't think there's a real threat to his job this year, I will say, for that.
And Johnny Mack comes in and says SVPG is not a freaking guard. And we agree with you. Believe me. He's got short arms. The dude is a center. But if he's not going to be your starting center, the reason why you want to get him reps at guard is because if he can finish a game at guard, you could make him active on game days. SVPG right now is running the risk of being the game day inactive if he's not the starting center. Why? Because Will Clapp and Alec Anderson can snap the ball if Connor McGovern gets hurt, but can also play guard if either David Edwards or Osiris Torrance get hurt. The Bills only carry 8 offensive linemen on game day. They typically roster 9, but only 8 on game day. So if SVPG wants to be one of those 8 and he's not starting center, he needs to show that he's versatile enough to at least finish a game at guard, because the Bills aren't going to want to put him in at center and move Connor McGovern back to guard in the middle of a game. That's just not something that they're going to want to do. So that is why we talk about him getting guard snaps and why that will be interesting as well, because that might give you an indication of how the Buffalo Bills view him sort of as a depth piece. Another guy I want to talk about is David Edwards.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people penciling him in, maybe not penning him in at the left guard position. One of the first things I'm looking for is I am looking for in training camp, is anyone else lining up at the first team left guard? Is he rotating with Lyle Collins? Is he rotating with Alec Anderson? Is somebody pushing David Edwards for that left guard job? Or is that left guard, is he being anointed as the sort of the left guard? That's what's going to be really interesting to see the first couple of days of training camp.
He's solid. He's a solid player, but I don't think that he's a guy that will like the Bills will be against giving the job to someone else if someone else outright earns it. I could really hope and think that maybe Alec Anderson could earn that left guard job in a competition with David Edwards. I think that this is an area of concern for me personally going into training camp. There's not a ton of areas for concern for me as far as like the roster talent, right? Like we talked about the receivers and all that, and that's more of a coaching and implementation thing. I don't think there's a lack of talent there. I do think there is a little bit of a lack of talent at left guard for this Bills offensive line. The Bills were super fortunate with not just the health of their offensive line last year, playing every game, but the level of play of the offensive line last year. And looking back, like we might look back and say that 2023 Bills offensive line was maybe the best in the Josh Allen era when all was said and done. Like I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that could very well happen when we look back on this era of the Bills. Left guard is a concern to me. I would like to see Alec Anderson pushing David Edwards a bit. On the other hand, if he's just absolutely balling and killing it, then great. But like I don't get that vibe that might happen. So I'm all for competition at left guard. I think he's in pencil. I don't think he's in pen. And I wouldn't mind seeing Alec Anderson push for that starting job.
Yeah, you mentioned Alec Anderson, and I would love that because I'm very high on Alec Anderson as well. The other name that makes sense to challenge David Edwards at left guard is Lyle Collins. However, we saw this spring Spencer Brown coming off that shoulder injury. He missed all of OTA, so Lyle Collins was playing first team right tackle. So Spencer Brown is expected to be back for training camp. But is he slow played? Is he maybe only taking 50% of the reps? Is he not working on pad days for the first week or 2 weeks? If so, you'll need Lyle Collins there to fill in those reps for Spencer Brown at right tackle. And that's going to take away from his ability to go in and compete at left guard if the Bills even envision him as a guy competing at that left guard spot. So Spencer Brown's health status is something to track. His contract status is something to track. And how that affects Lyle Collins is also something to track as well. The third position battle that I really want to sort of highlight here, we've already talked about the running back position, the second running back position, and the sixth wide receiver position. How about the depth battles along the offensive line? Is Ryan Vandemark going to get challenged as the swing tackle? Is Alec Anderson going to get challenged as the swing guard? I think SVPG, when we did our 53-man roster show, the 5 penciled in starters right now on the offensive line and SVPG were the 6 guys that we said were like bona fide locks. And then from there, you got 3 more guys to fill. You'd expect Vandemark and Anderson to be 2 of them, but does a guy like Richard Garage come in and challenge? Does a guy like Kevin Jarvis come in and challenge? Maybe Will Clapp isn't what we thought he is as sort of like a Greg Manx type. Maybe he really is a legitimate threat to make this roster. You have Lyle Collins floating around. You have a number of guys who could come in and legitimately compete for some of these depth spots. Nobody saw Alec Anderson coming. So is there somebody maybe who comes in and really surprises the Buffalo Bills, Joe Brady, Sean McDermott, Aaron Cromer, etc.? That'll be something to watch, the depth battles along the offensive line.
I mean, I would be surprised if anyone supplanted Anderson or Vandemark. I just like they've been in the Bills system. Yes, Anderson kind of made the roster, quote, maybe unexpectedly, but that he was in the system, right? And I just think, I think a guy like Garage would have to really really significantly outplay or outside of an injury, right? I just don't see. I think Vandemark is firmly entrenched as the swing. I don't see that, and I think Anderson really could be your swing interior. So to me, I love the trajectory those guys came up on, and I like penning them in on the 53 right now. I'm not super high on the depth behind those guys. Garage is nice. He's got some support, I'm sure, in the building. The Bills have kind of put some time in him. Will Clapp, I don't know, doesn't really do it for me. And then, Grable and, 6th rounder, I don't think he's going to make the team. I think he's earmarked for the practice squad. I don't know. I mean, Grable, I agree to an extent with AK Cash in the comment section that he's a wild card, but I just would find it shocking if he really pushed that hard. He would be the guy, if you're kind of looking at someone, draft pick, has some talent, can play tackle, maybe he's a guy, but I don't love the depth of the offensive line behind these first 6 or 7 guys. And maybe that's fair, right? I mean, you can't be great everywhere. So,
Yeah.
um, it's just, yeah, I don't see it.
in in Aaron Cromer, we have to trust.
Yeah.
All right. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, normally on a normal week in the Air 8 Hour universe, I'd be telling you, thank you, have a good night. We'll see you on Thursday night as we preview the Buffalo Bills defense. However, nobody go anywhere because it's training camp, right? And those pre-recorded shows on Thursday don't quite work because we'll be previewing things when the Buffalo Bills have already taken the field. And you guys will be like, why are you guys previewing the defense when there's already 2 days of practice under the Buffalo Bills belt? So we're going to stay here this evening, this Monday night, for an extended episode. We'll probably be going an hour 15, and we're going to preview the defense now. And over the course of training camp, we'll just be one show a week, Mondays at 9 p.m. And then when the regular season hits, we will be back to our normal pregame, live on game day, and our post-game show on Monday nights at 9. So just a little bit of a scheduling information there for you, some points of reference if you are looking for more Air Raid Hour. So don't check out. We're not done yet. We're going to preview the defense now. And there was a tweet I got from Brian Freedom. This is another question or another point of emphasis I got from him on something he's looking for in training camp on X. I thought this was a great question. He said, do Dorian Williams and Kaiir Elam benefit from extra snaps in OTAs? Because Matt Milano missed with injuries and Rasul Douglas missed because he just didn't show up. He said he never shows up for OTAs. So Dorian Williams and Kaiir Elam got some extra reps in OTAs this year. Is that going to really benefit them as they head into their second and third year respectively?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely will. I think the more repetitions those guys get, it's just going to be the better for them. I'm not saying that the same kind of come up's going to happen for Dorian Williams like that did for Terrell Bernard, but you could see the talent of Dorian Williams in flashes last year when he was forced into playing time. So I just think for him, it's going to become, kind of really fine tuning the mental game through reps. And I can see Dorian Williams being a guy that really improves through getting a lot of these extra reps because the physical ability is obviously there for a guy like Dorian Williams. So the coaching and the reps from OTAs are definitely going to help him. And the same really can be said for Kaiir Elam, new secondary coach. He's got a chance to get some significant playing time this year. He has to know that this is kind of I wouldn't say a make or break year for him in his NFL career, but it could send him on one trajectory or the other going into the latter stages of his rookie contract. So I definitely think that for both of these guys, this is going to be a benefit. And for the overall team, it's going to be a benefit. So yes, definitely.
I like that point you made too. Overall team, because in reality, we don't want Dorian Williams or Kaiir Elam to have to step on the football field this year, because if they do, that means either Matt Milano or Rasul Douglas or Christian Benford is hurt. But that's just not reality. In the National Football League, guys get hurt. So if Dorian Williams can take a leap, anything close to resembling the leap Terrell Bernard took from year 1 to year 2, and say Matt Milano goes down again, maybe the repercussions aren't as damaging as they were when Matt Milano went down last year. If Rasul Douglas or Christian Benford go down and Kaiir Elam can step up and be a dependable starting NFL cornerback, again, you don't have the damage you saw last year when Trey White went down until we were able to get Rasul Douglas to come in and replace him. So both of these guys, I think, can be a part of the Buffalo Bills' future, but because of injuries, which are realities in the National Football League, all that time in OTAs can really help them in terms of being valuable depth pieces. And I think by the time we roll around to the end of the year, we could be looking back and saying whew, man, Dorian Williams saved our butt this year. Or, ooh, Kaiir Elam saved our butt this year. Thankfully, they were able to develop in this system and come in and plug in and fill in a spot when a guy went down. So I'm with you. I really think those were some very valuable reps for these two guys, and I look forward to seeing them continue that progression in a training camp. But hopefully, we do not need to see them on the field in the regular season. Alex King hit us up on social media with a comment as well. You can find him on X at @A_4all. He said Vaughn and Milano returns. Can they get back to being difference makers, or will their age and injury history cap their ability to be the impact players they had been previous?
Milano, I definitely think can, right?
Mhm.
Just because of his age and because the injury he's recovering from, and I'm not trying to minimize it, right? I just think that um it's probably a more straightforward, type of injury to come back from mentally. That's going to be the big question, as it is with some of these major injuries. Von Miller is, now multiple injuries. He's aged. He was back for the latter part of last year and really, didn't contribute. And so I have much more faith that Milano can return to, Pro Bowl, all pro form than a guy like Von Miller, but it also comes down to what your expectations are. I don't think people should reasonably expect Von Miller to be like an all pro still. I think if
Mm.
you can expect Von Miller to be an 8 to 10 sack contributor based on how much you're paying him, I think that's a reasonable expectation. Maybe that's too low of an expectation from
Mm.
for some people, but to me, he's got to be the guy that now another year removed and kind of what he did with his contract, and he's got to be the guy that is your primary sack artist, right? I mean, he has to be with what based on what you're paying him and with that contract, and obviously different people contribute relative to their contracts. You have a guy like Kincaid contributing immensely on a rookie deal. You have a guy like Von Miller who's really not contributing at all, making a crap ton
Mhm.
of money. So um, my confidence level is pretty high that Milano can get back. I don't know if he's going to be 100% of what he was. I think he can be very close. I think Von Miller, we just need to hope that he can contribute 8 to 10 sacks this year.
Bobby Babich, just like Joe Brady is sort of the now full-time new offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, Bobby Babich is now the new full-time defensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills, being promoted from his spot as the linebackers coach. A bunch of storylines regarding Bobby Babich to keep an eye out for in training camp. First of all, again, I don't want to spoil too much of the embedded for you, but both Joe Brady and Bobby Babich, so full of energy. They were both highlighted in the Bills embedded video. Having those younger, young gun, hot shot coordinators, that was a nice little breath of fresh air. And both guys, both Joe Brady and Bobby Babich especially, like I think both of those guys at the Buffalo Bills have any semblance of success this year are going to be head coaches in the National Football League sooner rather than later. But for Bobby Babich, one of the keys to maybe becoming a head coach is who's calling the plays on defense. Is it Sean McDermott's defense and Bobby Babich is just helping him run it? Or is Bobby Babich calling the shots? How much freedom is Bobby Babich given? How much is Sean McDermott lurking in the shadows of Bobby Babich? Those are things to keep an eye out for in training camp this year.
Yeah, big thing to keep an eye on. And it's like I love kind of how the Bills are approaching this with the two coordinators with Babich and Brady. Younger guys, but they still have McDermott there for that stability. And like it's kind of like what they did with the roster too, right? It's like it's not a rebuild, it's kind of like an evolution. They're kind of trying something new, which I appreciate because even though this team has been successful immensely in the regular season and has had some playoff success, like it hasn't gotten them to where they want to go. So you can't keep doing the same things over and over again. So now you have these two young coordinators, you have a younger roster trying something different. I am all for it because we need to see different results in the postseason. And Bobby Babich could be the guy that kind of adds his own sort of element to this defense and sort of takes what McDermott established with Leslie Frazier early on and puts his own stamp on it. That's what I'm hoping happens. And I'm hoping McDermott like can look back at his time, let's say in Philadelphia, where he was working under Jim Johnson, right? And kind of, you know, at some point, someone had to give Sean McDermott a chance, right?
Mhm.
And he got that chance in Carolina. And so it's like he at some point needs to give
Yep.
a guy like Bobby Babich a chance, right? And I don't know how soon we'll get an answer on that. I don't think we'll
Mhm.
get an answer on that super early in training camp, but I would love to see Bobby Babich get a chance to take full autonomy of the defense.
Yeah, I think it's going to be something that goes down to the wire. Like, I think you might legitimately see a more aggressive Buffalo Bills defense this preseason because the Buffalo Bills allow Bobby Babich to call plays throughout the preseason to get his feet wet, to get warm, to sort of prove himself. And then I think before you get to the Cardinals game, that's when Sean McDermott might make that decision. Or maybe before the third preseason game, Sean McDermott makes that decision. Okay, Bobby, you've shown me enough. Or, Bobby, I'm going to be the one who calls the plays this year. You're just going to be the one who structures the room. You're going to be the one helping me out, but I'm going to be the one calling plays. So I think it's something that I don't think we're going to have a concrete answer until closer to the Arizona Cardinals game than we are right now. I have a super chat here from your boy Lettuce. I always appreciate you, your boy. He says Buffalo Bills going all the way this time. And I'll tell you what, again, Bills embedded today. Like it's 100% like highly edited to make the Buffalo Bills look good, but the vibes were so strong in that video today. The vibe, like you're going to enjoy it tomorrow at work.
I can't wait.
Yeah, you might not get any work done tomorrow. Like it is the vibes were strong.
Or will I get a ton of work done because I'll be so motivated? Who knows? Who knows?
The vibes were strong with the Buffalo Bills in that Bills embedded video. The chemistry those guys have, the love they have for one another, just the way everybody's clicking. It just seems like a very toxic free environment in that locker room. And I don't know if I can say that it's been that way the last couple of seasons. So after watching that Bills embedded, I'm definitely vibing with what you're putting out there, your boy. Edge rusher. To me, the eyes are on Von Miller, as we just talked about previously. Does he have any juice left? Can he return to form? And then I think the eyes are on Gregory Rousseau and AJ Epinesa. Increase workload, more specifically geared towards AJ Epinesa, and just can these guys reach their ceiling? So you're looking for Von Miller to just find maybe a floor, and you're looking for Rousseau and Epinesa to find that ceiling.
Yeah, and I think like those are the three guys you ultimately need to count on as your top end guys. And then obviously you've got Smoot, Javon Solomon kind of behind them, hopefully adding something as well. But like you went out and made it a priority to bring AJ Epinesa back in a situation where you were cap strapped, right? You saw him as a future piece of this defense. You went ahead and exercised the option on Rousseau. Von Miller did the thing with his contract. Like these guys have all in their own ways been sort of targeted by Brandon Beane through their contract situations as you guys are core key pieces to making this edge rushing group successful. So look, I think even if you see very incremental jumps from Rousseau and Epinesa, that's good with me because I think they've both already played very solidly for where they were drafted, for expectations, things like that. So to me, I don't necessarily need to see huge incremental improvements from those two guys. So if you kind of couple that with a little bit of a higher floor or even, a high floor for Von Miller, I'll say, then you could be in a pretty decent situation with the edge group, especially if you have guys like Smoot and Solomon as your fourth and fifth guys that end up making the team. So it is a question mark though, right? I mean, this is a group that I think there will be a lot of expectation on this group to perform this year, with Von Miller being another year removed, AJ Epinesa getting the contract. So I think they will perform, but there is pressure on this group, I would say.
Yeah, you'd assume based on the contracts that Dwayne Smoot is going to be the fourth guy sort of in this edge group. And then there's really competition from there. Is it going to be Javon Solomon, the rookie? Is it going to be Kingsley Jonathan, the guy who was sort of the fifth defensive end in this rotation last year? Is it going to be the other free agent pickup, Casey Toohill? So looking for who breaks through in the rotation is going to be something to keep an eye on. And then obviously, who are some guys that maybe you can earmark for the practice squad? How does Cameron Klein look? We've even had conversations about Cameron Klein maybe being a sleeper to make the roster because of his special teams abilities with these new special teams rules. So it'll be really interesting to see how the back half of this edge rusher rotation, because we know the Buffalo Bills like to rotate their guys at this position, how that plays out. And I think every single person in the chat and definitely the two hosts of this show are hoping that it's Javon Solomon who comes out as the victor in that competition.
Yeah, I mean, we both put him on our 53. I mean, I think like the Bills need that juice. They need pass rushing juice. I think that the reviews so far on Solomon have been positive, right, in the OTAs. So he needs to do that in camp with the pads on, obviously. He needs to be under Von Miller's wing. Even if Von Miller physically isn't able to do what he's been able to do throughout most of his career, from a mentor mentee standpoint, I think that's a good that's as good of a match as you're going to get skill set wise, because the skill sets and the styles are similar with Solomon and Miller. So like, I'm hoping the Bills can squeeze a little juice out of Solomon this year in some situations, and we'll see what happens. But I'm maybe that's more with my heart. I'm hoping that than my head. But I hope they can squeeze some juice out of Solomon this year.
You used a word there, juice, right? That's sort of like a key word of this training camp preview show, because you're using it in one regard to talk about just maybe trying to get John Solomon on the field at all. To me, the word juice in terms of previewing this training camp is some of the older players. Von Miller, I want to read reports in training camp that he's showing some juice. He's showing some
Yeah,
energy, right?
yeah, totally.
Looking like his old self. And then I want to talk about the defensive interior now. Daquan Jones, right? 32 years old, just got a new contract. He obviously had that injury last year, came back, kind of just blended in a little bit. I want to start hearing the reports of like Daquan Jones is showing some juice. He's looking healthy. He's looking energized. That's one thing I'm looking for in training camp. And the other, at Oliver, I'm looking for the takeover. Like that's the adjective I'm looking for. Taking over, game breaking, interior pressures, like taking over. Like that's what I'm looking for at Oliver. So when I'm reading reports from training camp and when we're talking to Alex, Daquan Jones, the thing I want to hear is the word juice. At Oliver, the things I want to hear is taking over and dominating. Those are the key words I'm looking for with those two guys.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. And then, talking about the guys behind them now, Dwayne Carter, I want to hear positive things about Dwayne Carter, right?
He might be
I
like
think
him and Keon Coleman are the two that I'm just looking forward the most to seeing.
yes. Yeah, whether it's juice or some other adjective, I want it to be like dominant. Like that would be a great word to hear. If Dwayne Carter's going up against like the backups, right? Like maybe it's Dwayne Carter against SVGP, right? In some reps, and like wouldn't upset me if Dwayne Carter's dominating those reps. So, I'd like to see that as well.
Yeah, like Johnson and Williams, I don't want to say they're boring, but I think they're going to come in and they're just going to do their job. I know that we can depend on them. I'm not really worried about those two guys. It's Dwayne Carter. I really want to hear that he's making those splash plays, and I really want to see him form a role in this defensive line rotation, because I think he's going to be a really good and important part of this team's future, especially, moving ahead into years 2025, 2026, etc. But I'd like to see some of that stuff now in the year 2024. Speaking of juice, this is the last time I think I'm going to use the word juice tonight, but linebacker position, Matt Milano. I want to see he's healthy. I want to see looking like his old self. I want to hear the word juice utilized, right? Like those are the things I'm looking for when we talk about linebackers and we talk about Matt Milano, Terrell Bernard. I want to be seeing that he's making plays, that he's being a leader. Those are the two things I'm looking for from the starting linebackers of the Buffalo Bills. For Milano, it's his health and his juice. For Bernard, it's his leadership and his playmaking ability.
Yeah, and I think like you start thinking about how you want to hear these guys described. That's right. You want to hear the phrase like flying all over the field. You want to hear the phrase very active in the passing game, very active in defending the run. Like those are the types of things you want to hear being described about both of those guys. And like if Milano is back to health, even close to 100%, this could be one of, if not the best linebacking duo in the NFL. And that's not a homer take, in my opinion. Some people may say it is, but I don't think it is, because you have Matt Milano, who is a former All-Pro, and you have Terrell Bernard, who could have garnered All-Pro attention last year. And obviously it has to come together, and they have to play the season. It's not just about their past performance. They have to do it in 2024 together. We saw only very few games of these two guys together last year early on. So like, man, this group, I love the group overall, right? And I've talked about this before. It's maybe the deepest talented position group on the team. Like obviously Josh Allen kind of trumps everything, but this is a really good group. And we already talked about Dorian Williams and we talked about some of these other guys, but man, if Milano and Bernard can kind of be like that just centerpiece of the center of the defense, literally, then man, this could be a really special season for those two.
Yes, you mentioned how this could be the deepest position group on the team, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out behind Matt Milano, behind Terrell Bernard, two guys who have, injury history. Is it going to be Nicholas Morrow behind Terrell Bernard? Is it going to be Dorian Williams behind Matt Milano? How do they look? Who else maybe gets second team reps? Who's on the third team? There are guys who are legitimately competing for jobs. Could it be Nicholas Morrow versus Deion Jones? Could it be Deion Jones versus Balon Spector? Those are the questions that you're going to ask yourself. Like, we had our 53-man roster show. We sort of laid out what we expect. We expect Deion Jones to sort of be the odd man out in the equation. I think you even had Balon Spector as your odd man out in the equation as well. So it'll be interesting to see who's rotating with the second unit, because the guys who are closer to the first team, the guys who maybe get some first team reps when Matt Milano gets a break, those are the guys who are going to be the front runners to make the team, and their usage on special teams is important as well.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we talk about this Bills draft class, and like top to bottom, I just like really liked it all the way through round 5, 6, right? And Olafoshio, you've got him there as well. He'll, I'm sure, carve out a role on special teams, but like he can bring something defensively as well. Like, is he gonna challenge Dorian Williams a bit, maybe for that role behind Matt Milano? Is it going to be Morrow, like you said? Is it Morrow or Spector maybe challenging for that backup, Mike spot behind Terrell Bernard? So it's a good problem to have, and Brandon Beane clearly, also, took some accountability in sort of what this linebacker room looked like when they faced injury last year, and seeing what devastation, I'll say, it caused the Bills in that playoff game against the Chiefs, and like trying to make that a non-discussion point for 2024.
The cornerback position, I think when you hear the words Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford, some of the words you're going to want to hear after their names this year on the training camp reports is like looking dependable. I don't even need it to be like out of this world. It's looking competent, looking dependable. That's what I need from Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford on the boundary, because, if they're getting beat here, if they're getting beat there, is there maybe a chance that a guy like Kaiir Elam can enter the equation for the Buffalo Bills? That's something to keep an eye out for in training camp this year.
It definitely is. I think that the Bills are in a decent position with cornerback. I wouldn't say it's, it is better than they've had in years past going into training camp, because Elam is still young. He's still a talented player. In years past, this might have been like a Josh Norman or a Levi Wallace as that third guy. Dane Jackson, obviously, I think losing him was, maybe a bigger deal than a lot of people would want to admit, because of the depth that he brought to the team and just the reliability. So can Kaiir Elam be that guy? Can he be like a Dane Jackson who, when called upon, can be reliable? You really need that from your third boundary corner. And so that's going to be the thing, is like the consistency and the reliability of Kaiir Elam. Can he show some consistency in camp? Can it be a story we're hearing where it's like, yes, he's putting a string of good days together? Or is it going to be like, oh, he had a really good day and then he had like a really bad day? Like that, those ups and downs we want to see kind of get eliminated, and we want to see a little bit more consistency.
Yeah, the depth of the cornerback room is going to be interesting, right? Because if Kaiir Elam struggles, now all of a sudden it's like, do we go and try to get a veteran out here and try to bring a veteran into the fold? You have the boundary cornerback 4 position that's open. Jamarcus Ingram is probably the front runner, but you also got Kyron Brown. You got Ken H. Lovely. Are they going to show enough? I think if there's one position on this football team where they could bring in a veteran free agent at some point in the process, it's probably the boundary cornerback position. But that's why it's such a big camp for Kaiir Elam, Jamarcus Ingram, Kyron Brown, even a UDFA like Ken H. Lovely, because they have a chance to go out there and, prevent the Bills or stop the Bills from making such a free agent transaction.
I mean, and with the theme of kind of how the Bills have approached the other youth movements and other positions, I'm actually fine kind of with the depth as it stands. I'd give Ingram, I'd give Lovely. I mean, I'd give
Mhm.
these guys opportunities. I mean, this is the chance for them, right? This is like
Yeah.
the time of the year where these types of players should get their chances, right? And then if things don't work out, yes, there's always veterans that you could call up at a moment's notice, but like this is the time, right? You got to give these guys
Mhm.
every chance they can uh, in these reps. So I'm kind of okay with them not going into the market, even if there's some struggles.
And I'll tell you what, too, one position that I think is not getting talked about is the backup nickel position. That's something I'm going to have my eye on. Behind Teron Johnson, who's the backup nickel? Is it, uh, is it, why am I blanking on the name of our draft pick? Is it Daquan
Taquan
Hardy?
Hardy. Yep.
Is it Cam Lewis? Is it Delaney, the free agent we got from Tampa Bay? Who is the person to Corey Couch, right? Who is the UDFA? Who's lining up behind Teron Johnson as that backup nickel? As we mentioned earlier, special teams could play a vital role in this as well. Cam Lewis is a quality special teams player. So maybe he gets the nod at the backup nickel because of that.
Mm,
Daquan Hardy, maybe he gets the nod or the first crack at it because the Buffalo Bills want him to also be their primary punt returner. So special
mm.
teams is going to play a role, I think, with the back half of this cornerback depth chart. And that backup nickel spot is also very, very important as well. If Teron Johnson were to go down, we need someone competent to fill that role.
Yeah, and I always like my heart always goes and wants to go with the draft pick, right? And Hardy, and like it's the same every year. It's like I always want the draft pick, but you can't count out Cam Lewis, right, in this battle
Mhm.
because of his tenure with the team, his versatility, his ability to play special teams. Like I think that probably will be the starting battle. The primary battle, I would say, at the backup nickel will be between Cam Lewis and Daquan Hardy. And hey, may the best man win. I think defensively, you're getting an upgrade over what you had with Saran Neal as far as defensively. Now, maybe it's a downgrade um, from a special teams perspective, but it's not a huge downgrade, I think. I mean, like, yes, Saran Neal was a very, very good special teamer. And maybe I'll be eating my words, but I mean, look, at the end of the day, like you can't always make a decision based on the
Mhm.
guy being like a fantastic special teamer. In some cases you can. In this case, you need a guy at backup nickel who can play defensively. He can't just be a special team only type of guy.
Your boy coming in with a super chat. He says we should trade for Trayvon Diggs if our depth falters. Yeah, I don't think Trayvon wants anything to do with the Buffalo Bills. But yeah, it would be fun to stick it to Stephon or mess with Stephon by doing that. The last position on defense I want to talk about here is the safety position. This is sort of the mystery bag for the Buffalo Bills this year. We talked at the top of the show about a guy like Taylor Rapp taking on some leadership responsibilities. Sean McDermott really coaching, or talking him up. But really, like, who's playing where? Are they mixing and matching? Is it guys in, guys out? Is it a different combination every day? Like, what's the safety position going to look like? That is a position in flux. We've both talked about our expectation to start it. It's Edwards and it's Rapp, but I could see the Buffalo Bills mixing and matching or even throwing out some random, maybe even Cole Bishop, just throw him right into the fire. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if after a couple of weeks we see something like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you kind of like if I was gonna bet on it, I would say it would be like Rapp and Edwards like day one or like maybe even week one.
Mhm.
But I think Cole Bishop's gonna play sooner rather than later on this team. And the Bills probably will be playing all three of those guys fairly regularly. I think Cam Lewis makes the team. I had him on my 53-man roster. He can mix in at
Mhm.
safety as well. And I think they'll keep five. I had DeMar Hamlin making my 53-man roster as well. So I think they'll have a lot of options at safety. I do think that Bishop will play sooner rather than later based on, again, the prior embeddeds we've seen, the fact that he's a second round pick, the fact that
Mhm.
the Bills do need to plan for the future at safety. And so it doesn't look like beyond 2024 that's going to involve Mike Edwards. Maybe they resign him. I
Yeah.
don't know. But it certainly looks like the future at safety for at least one of the spots is going to be Cole Bishop. And I don't know about what Taylor Rapp's future really is, but the Bills will need eventually to get a center fielder, I think a more true center fielder. So I think Bishop's going to play
Mhm.
fairly early on, and I think all three of those guys are going to mix in fairly early on.
It'll be interesting to see how much pressure Cole Bishop can apply and how quickly he can apply it to those two guys in front of him. And then you have the safety 4 position, because maybe the Buffalo Bills don't keep 5 safeties, maybe they keep 4 safeties, and you got a lot of familiar names, right? Cam Lewis, who just signed a 2-year contract, he can also play nickel, he can also play special teams. Is he your 4th safety? DeMar Hamlin, who had a big OTA week, right? He made a lot of plays during OTAs. Is he a guy finally 2 years removed from that awful medical incident that he has? Is he a guy who can step into that 4th safety spot and maybe even possibly compete for more? And then you have the free agent the Buffalo Bills added from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Delaney, who, he's got some NFL experience under his belt, playing in some games at the safety position. So it'll be really interesting to see how the depth of that position plays out as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think to echo what Spin said in the comment section, he said like, I'm good with the defense. It's just up to the players to produce. And then who said it? Someone said, oh, Roy said, I'm actually feeling good with the safety room. And I kind of agree with him. Like I think it would be different if it was like, Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde last year were both playing at like super high, like all pro levels, but we did see a drop off, right, from those guys last year. And like, I'm not against like at some point a Micah Hyde reunion, by the way, if like injuries force that, I'm not against that. But I do think it's time for the Bills to look to the future at this position. So I'm kind of excited about seeing some new faces in the safety room. And look, there may be some growing pains, there may be some mental mistakes, whatever, but like the Bills had to get youthful here, and they somewhat did, I would say, pretty good job of it for one off season.
Last but not least, we got to talk about our favorite topic on this show, special teams. And the more I really think about it, the more I think the special teams could be the downfall of this football team this year. You had the 28th ranked unit in the NFL last year that Matthew Smiley led. You have this new game-changing rule on kickoffs, and you have the same offensive coordinator that last year led the 28th ranked unit. That's the person you're putting in charge of figuring out kickoffs, the new kickoff rule. That's not the most encouraging thing in the world. It's going to be really interesting to see how the Buffalo Bills manage the new kickoff. You have Tyler Bass, who signed that fat new contract and then became completely unreliable. And that contract is uncuttable. So as we get through training camp and as we get through preseason week 1, preseason week 2, does he embarrass himself enough to the point where the Buffalo Bills have to bring in a kicker, like a street kicker, like a Nick Folk type, like find someone on the street? Do we get to that point at any point in training camp and have to start thinking about eating Tyler Bass's money or carrying 2 kickers? That's a stressful thing to think about, is with training camp looming, right? You have Sam Martin, who the Buffalo Bills decided to lock in his bonus before cutting him. And now the biggest upset that everyone's expecting on this roster is for a UDFA punter that no one ever heard of before the Buffalo Bills signed him to come beat him out for a roster spot because he's a better holder of kicks. And then you have the return game. We expect Ty Johnson to be the kick returner, but who knows who our punt returner is? Are we risking Keon Coleman injury? Are we risking Curtis Samuel's injury? Does a guy like Daquan Hardy step up and take the job? There are just so many question marks about special teams. And the more and more I think about it, the more and more I think that we didn't do a good enough job talking about it enough, because there are so many question marks and so many things that could go wrong with this unit that we just look back 3-4 months from now and say, we should have seen that coming.
I think that the Bills have no choice but to hope that Tyler Bass works through whatever demons he's been facing. And if it comes down to keeping Browning because Tyler Bass kicks better with him as a holder, that's what it's going to have to be. And you're just going to have to take what that comes with the punting, right? Because I think at the end of the day, the Bills need someone who's a reliable kicker more than they do need someone who can maybe get a couple tenths of a seconds more hang time on punts, because you're hoping, one, that the Bills aren't even punting that much to begin with, and two, like we've seen in the playoffs and teams with these good kickers. I mean, Harrison Butker like just absolutely dominated in the playoffs after him having a down year a year ago because of an ankle injury. He comes back and then just like kills it. So it's like the Bills kind of have to hope that Tyler Bass can get through whatever these demons are, whether it's mental or what. But like, I don't know. I mean, I have a hard time reading sort of what the mental makeup is of Tyler Bass. Like on one hand, I'm like, well, he seems like he's like got a pretty high level of confidence, but then I'm like, does he really? Like, is he like a head case? Like, is he mentally just like effed? Like, I don't know, right? It's almost like
Mhm.
getting the yips. Like, I don't know. Like, you just hope that's not the case. But and the reports obviously from OTAs and stuff were like that he was missing a ton of kicks with Martin as the holder. He made more with
Mhm.
Browning as the holder. So like this is an issue for the Bills. Maybe it's their biggest issue going
Yeah.
into training camp is special teams.
And the returning game is gonna be interesting as well. I think Ty Johnson, that's pretty well set in stone. I think that he's gonna be the kick returner. Maybe someone surprises us. I know Darrington Evans will get his shot to maybe upset a roster spot by returning kicks. But really, punt returning, I really hope that they just plug Daquan Hardy in there and Daquan Hardy is up to the challenge. I really do not want to see a
Yeah,
rotation of guys at punt returner. I don't want to see a situation where you get just like a punt catcher back there. And I really don't want to see the Buffalo Bills risking their top receivers, guys like
I
Shakir,
agree.
Samuel, and
I
Keon
agree.
Coleman to injury. So I really, really do hope that a guy like Daquan Hardy is able to win that job.
Yeah, and I think I think for me the worst case scenario is you put Shakir back there, right, to mainly be a catcher and maybe do a little bit because who knows? Maybe Shakir ends up being like the fourth or fifth option on offense, and the Bills are willing to live with that, right? Like you
Mhm.
just don't know. Like you've got Kincaid, you've got Coleman, you've got still Knox, Samuel, James Cook. Like I think Shakir will be in that top 3 to 4 target guy, but if he's like the fourth or fifth guy getting targets, then the Bills may put him back there.
Mhm.
You just never know.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening on the Air Raid Hour. Felt good to be back. So good that we went for over an hour this evening. We'll be back next Monday, and Dave, no more projecting. We start analyzing real football, albeit football in shorts,
Hey,
next
it's something.
Monday.
It's something.
And we will be joined by Alex Brasky of the Batavia News Daily, Boots on the Ground. He'll be giving us all of his observations from what he sees at training camp. Probably be joining us for the first 20, 30 minutes of the show, maybe longer if he can put up with us. I don't know. But he'll be joining us next week for at least the first half of the Air Raid Hour as we break down what we see over the first week of Buffalo Bills training camp. We made it.
We made it. I'm excited, and I'm glad Alex was willing to join us. He's always been a friend of the show from afar, I guess I would say, but he's always interacted positively with us
Yeah.
on Twitter and things like that. So very privileged to have him come on for us throughout camp.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We will see you next Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!